Never forget when the Atlanta Hawks, after a season of tanking, landed the number 3 pick in the 2018 draft, and because of the incompetence of the Sacramento Kings, who decided to take Marvin Bagley with the 2nd overall pick, the Hawks had the opportunity of a lifetime to draft a once-in-a-generation level player, Luka Doncic, which they did. They would draft Luka and promptly trade him away to the Dallas Mavericks to move 2 spots back in the draft, while also getting a future first-round pick in return to select Trae Young, a player they believe was their next franchise player, a player they believed had Steph Curry-like potential. And while the Hawks weren't necessarily wrong, Trae Young would go on to become the face of their franchise, an elite offensive player both with his ability to put the ball in the hoop but also generating offense for others with his playmaking and court vision. The criticism, the skepticism that scouts had about Trae Young coming into the league, namely his lack of defensive effort and poor shot selection, have slowly started to become a reality for the Atlanta Hawks. And with the Hawks, who going into this season had high aspirations of making a deep run in what was believed to be a wide open Eastern Conference, are now sitting once again firmly entrenched in the play-in for the 5th straight season. To make matters worse, the Hawks are now 2-8 when Trae Young has played this season, and 14-11 when he's been out of the lineup at the time of this recording anyway. And with Trae Young being extension eligible and the Hawks having not giving him an extension yet, Trae having a player option in the final year of his deal next season, which he could decline to become an unrestricted free agent this summer, it started to become abundantly clear that the Hawks are finally looking to move on from their franchise player, a player they've stood by for quite some time despite the team's lack of success, but having finally now hit their breaking point. The problem for the Hawks, though, is that while one would think that trading a star-level player in his prime should create a bidding war among the league for Trae's services, especially those teams that are looking for that one piece to put them over the top and into contention, and a player like Trae should fetch quite the haul that will set up the Hawks for success in a post-Trae Young world. But is there really a market for Trae Young when he's off to one of the worst seasons of his career on a large contract, and of course looking for a sizable extension at that? Well, let's talk about it. This video is brought to you by Topps Now. I don't know about you guys, but when I was a kid growing up in the 90s, I was all about basketball card collecting. I used to have my binder of trading cards and all their protective sleeves. The more rare ones I would put in protective cases. Over the years though, I'd kind of fallen out of that hobby, but I've slowly started to get back into it, especially after I discovered Topps Now. Topps Now are trading cards that drop the day after games, capturing the biggest NBA moments. So after a big moment, play or stat line from a player happens in a game, Topps could list a card for sale the next day. Collectors order the card and receive it in the mail once it's been printed. Taking a look at the site now while I'm recording this, and we've got the LeBron James reverse jam from the other night on the 28th, Kawhi Leonard's career high 55-point game against the Pistons, that was a fun one by the way, and Scotty Barnes, his crazy stat line the other night with a 20-20-10 game. I'm going to go ahead and pick up the LeBron card, and I'm also going to do the Scotty Barnes one as well. And guys, these cards are only available for 48 hours. If you act quickly and buy the base card, you get a chance to actually hit on one of the auto or relic cards, which I've linked in the description to see what those look like. Here's some of the ones that I've sold in the past as well to give you an idea of some of the key moments here. So follow along and grab each Topps Now card with me. You can find it all in the link in the description to collect every big moment. Let me know which cards you guys end up choosing, and thanks for Topps for sponsoring this video. Now, when reports started coming out across the NBA media landscape that the Hawks are now more than ever open to trading Trae Young, something that was already had been speculated to be the case this past offseason when the Hawks didn't offer Trae that extension, I thought, okay, that makes sense, especially with the Hawks' poor play in a season where most had predicted them to finish in the top 5 in the Eastern Conference. But then I thought about it more. And like what any NBA sicko does, I started running some scenarios through the NBA trade machine, and I could not find a scenario, any kind of fake trade that actually made sense for either party involved, at least not one in which the Hawks come out on the very short end of the stick, where they're effectively moving Trae in a salary dump effort. Because when you think about it, how many teams are really in the market for a player like Trae Young, a starting point guard who is very ball dominant and would completely change the complexion of your offense? Not many. You're talking about less than a handful of teams in the NBA. Initially, I thought about the Timberwolves, who we know are looking for a point guard as Mike Conley is on the decline, but I don't like that fit alongside Anthony Edwards. Taking the ball out of Ant's hand is never something a team should consider. Maybe Orlando, who have been somewhat underwhelming this season and are pushing to win now and are still without that true point guard, but even for them, it would mean moving on from one of Jalen Suggs or Anthony Black to get a deal done, which I don't think it's worth it if you're the Magic. Not to mention the fact that by taking on his salary, that would push them over the second apron, which doesn't make sense for a team that isn't a true contender. And then of course, Trae is sort of the antithesis of the Magic's identity in being a strong, hard-nosed defensive team. Would the Grizzlies do a straight swap of Ja for Trae, distressed asset for distressed asset? But then what does that really do for either of those teams if you made that type of trade? It's not going to suddenly turn things around for either franchise. I mean, would the Mavs do it? Would they make a play for Trae Young in a deal that would send them Anthony Davis? But then again, does that really make sense for Cooper Flagg's development? And then when talking about some of these tanking teams that could potentially get involved to try and buy low on a star player who's still young, I just don't see that either. Any team that is tanking knows that adding Trae doesn't get you to where you want to be, because a bad team should not be in the business of giving up future assets for a player that is probably going to be good enough to give you a few more wins than you otherwise would not want. I guess the one trade I could potentially see when it comes to a tanking team that could make a play at Trae Young is the Nets swapping out Michael Porter Jr. for Trae Young. I doubt they would be willing to give up any draft capital to acquire Trae in a deal, but if they can flip MPJ after already getting a first-round pick in the Cam Johnson trade, flipping MPJ for Trae Young, maybe they would entertain it. But even then, does a trade like that make sense for the Hawks when it likely takes away touches and opportunities from Jalen Johnson, who is really taking Trae's place as the next face of the franchise? So I say all this because if the Hawks are truly committed to trying to move on from Trae Young prior to the trade deadline before he can potentially become an unrestricted free agent this summer, I don't see a scenario in which any team is going to be chomping at the bit to acquire Trae unless the Hawks attach future assets in the deal, or it's otherwise some sort of mega deal that involves an even bigger name than Trae Young. Say like a Giannis, for example, where the Hawks go all in on Giannis should he really push for a trade. They send the Bucks a bunch of picks, including their own unprotected pick swap they have with the Pelicans, which is looking to be a top 5 pick in this year's draft, and they include Trae in that deal as really salary filler to acquire Giannis. Or send him to a team that is currently in the business of acquiring future assets, say like the Wizards or the Jazz, maybe even the Hornets. They throw one of those teams a future protected first-round pick, and that team hopes they can get Trae to recoup some of his value and flip him in a sign-and-trade deal, or just let him walk in free agency to relieve that salary. Again, that's assuming Trae declines his player option, which isn't a guarantee, by the way. His value isn't great right now. He's having one of the worst seasons from an efficiency standpoint, shooting a career low from 3, averaging the fewest points per game of his career since his rookie season, the lowest number in assists per game since his rookie year as well. He may just opt in to the final year of his contract at $49 million and bet on himself to recoup his value and look for an even bigger contract in the summer of 2027. But yeah, I mean, going back to a potential trade deal in which the Hawks would have to give up future assets or attach draft capital in a deal to move on from Trae, I honestly don't know if that's even worth it to the Hawks, because if they're really dead set on Trae Young not being part of the organization anymore, and they see that there really isn't a market for him that gives them any kind of beneficial return, they're just going to let this season play out and see where things lie in the offseason. See which teams may become a little more desperate, which teams may have some more cap space to play with, or they wait to see what Trae does, whether declining or picking up his option, and if he declines, they let the market dictate his value in his next contract, and if it's too rich for their liking, they let him walk. Not ideal, and I doubt the Hawks would let it get to that point, but it would make more sense to let Trae walk rather than send out future assets just to get out of his contract this season. So while we can all speculate where Trae is going to be moved, what the Hawks are going to get for him in a trade deal, I really don't see a scenario that makes sense. I think it's more likely than not that Trae is still in a Hawks uniform at the end of the season. I would love to hear what you guys think, though. Send me some of the trade proposals you think would work, maybe some that I'm overlooking. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.